Today's second reading from St. Paul's letter to the Galatians provides us with a study in contrast. But there's some interesting details in this study of contrast. St. Paul begins by enumerating what he calls the works of the flesh. He calls them works, plural. And by and large, and for the sake of brevity, we could organize them under some main headings. You have, first of all, lust and all kinds of licentiousness. Then secondarily, you would have idolatry with all the sorcery and occult that goes along with that. And then finally, anger and divisions. In contrast to that, St. Paul then describes to us, and pay close attention, the fruit of the Holy Spirit. Singular. Which sounds interesting because after he says fruit, he gives us a list of love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, fidelity, meekness, and self-control. I think it's helpful to look at this list as a single fruit because that's precisely what it is. That's how St. Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, intended it to be. But what we get is an insight into the fruit, and there's a certain type, if we want to look at it this way, an ontological or logical ordering to the fruit so that we can understand it under its different aspects. But first I want to begin this way, is to look at the study of contrast, and we see how St. Paul begins his list of the works of the flesh with lusts and licentiousness. And it would almost cause one to think that when you're going to enumerate the various aspects of the fruit of the Holy Spirit, that's where you would begin, with the virtue that opposes those things. So you would think that self-control, chastity, would be first. But you notice how it's last in his list when examining the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And why might that be? Well, because it's always a matter of first things first. There's always something that has to precede something else in a logical ordering. And what happens, say for example, for those who struggle with self-control, that usually is identified primarily as unchastity, but it can also refer to very powerful passions that incline us to sin, become temptations and are stumbling blocks to following Jesus Christ. And sometimes what happens is because that is what is first on our radar screen with regards to examining our Christian life, we think that that's somehow where we need to begin. Where we need to begin. And in the worst case scenario, and there are individuals out there who labor under this belief, is that I cannot look at God and I cannot allow him to look upon me covered in the shame of my sin. Isn't this exactly what Adam and Eve did? They eat the fruit, and what do? They realize they're naked, and they hightail it to a bush and try to hide behind it, thinking God would never find them. And so that same sad drama of sin and shame continues to repeat itself. And with it, the belief that somehow I have to, as it were, quote, fix myself so that I may become lovable to God. That is so sad. That is so unfortunate, because it really denies our faith that God created us because he loves us. If he did not love us, he would not have created us. And we don't need to be fixed. We need to be redeemed. There's a difference. A massive difference. But nonetheless, where does this disfigured image of God come from? Where does this disfigured understanding of our image as created in his image and likeness come from? I've put some thought to that, and I think that, not to throw, too broad a brushstroke over it, has to do with our failure in catechesis. I do think, that it is super important that we learn the doctrines of the church. That we know the answer to certain questions regarding our faith. But if from the time of our childhood we're only taught doctrines of the faith and how to answer questions, and we are never engaged interiorly with the God who loves us and experience something of his love and his mercy and enter into a relationship, a friendship with him, then you find yourself living in the church of the rules. Because everything is so external. There's nothing interiorly that engages. That doesn't make us a follower of the rules, but rather by the grace of God transforms us into a child of God who lives by the Spirit and therefore, as St. Paul said, above the rules. Why? Because clothing ourselves in the virtues of Christ, we not only satisfy the requirements of the law, but we exceed them. Enough on that point. That's just my thought on the matter as of late. But we get back to what is the first thing that needs to happen? Well, we're all sinners. We're all beset by weaknesses. We're all tempted to sin, and some of us more violently and powerfully than others. Some are trapped in lives of sin and cannot find their way out. And so what is the first thing first? Well, St. Paul tells us when he gives us the interior glimpse into the logical ordering of the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And it is love. Well, what is love? Well, love is the principle of unity in the communion of persons. It is love that unites. And so the first order of business for every Christian is to pray. And sincerely so. To enter into that friendship with God, experience something of his friendship and his love for you, so that you can begin making a return of love for him. And it's that love that will bring you together and unite you to God. You see, and this is kind of getting back to this little analysis I'd given to you, is that technically speaking, that union of love began on the day we were baptized, when God poured his love into our hearts, adopted as his sons and daughters, and we become sharers in the divine life of God himself. But see, something unravels, something deteriorates over time. And we're not told how to keep that flame of faith alive in our hearts that we received on that day. And we find ourselves as young adults, as seniors, lost and bewildered and wondering what happened. Is God there? Does God love me? Yes, he does. And it is never too late to make a return. It all begins there, love. Following upon that is joy. Because what does joy consist of? Possessing the good that the heart desires. And what does the heart desire? God. And so in this communion of love, when we come, in a sense of speaking, to possess God, it fills us with joy. Not this giddy joy. Don't confuse joy with giddiness. And it has nothing to do with the false and fleeting joys of this world. We are talking about this deep current of satisfaction and contentment that nothing can disturb, even in our darkest trials. It is always there. And we find ourselves at peace. Why are we at peace? Because we are in union with God, reconciled to him. He belongs to us, we belong to him. And by his grace, there is a proper ordering, of our interior life, our intellect, our will, over our appetites, and our passions. We are well ordered in our interior, and our lives are well ordered. And in that well ordered life, there is to be found great peace, because there is nothing to accuse us. Nothing. And so really, it is the love, it is the joy, it is the peace that is the foundation and the bedrock of our Christian life, and the sure signs that at least we are by and large following and living a life according to the Spirit. Then, having said that, as we go and look at the other aspects of the fruit of the Holy Spirit, we find the point where we have to roll up our sleeves, because then comes patience. And why would that be? Because living a life in the Spirit is going to require that we will what God wills, when he wills it, and as he wills it. To will, not passively, not to say, this is God's will, thy will be done. No, to will what God wills. God, not only do I recognize your will for me in this, I also will it for myself. Because you have willed it, and as you have willed it. And that means all our trials, adversities, difficulties, and the suffering we'll experience in this life. We must be patient and endure these things for love of God, to show God our love for him. But Father, can't I show God I love him in another way? No, you can't. You cannot. How did Jesus Christ prove his love for us? He has paved a path with his own blood and tears and said, "Follow me." There is no other way. And so then as we work through our list and then we get to, the thing that bedevils us all, the power of our passions, and the temptation and inclination to sin. You get the right ordering right. You focus on what is most important and do first things first. I'm not going to say without any effort or cooperation on our part, these things will come to resolve themselves. Because in this process, we're being redeemed. Not going to the end and trying to fix and make ourselves lovable, acceptable, and pleasing to God. Because it's impossible. We can't do that. God already loves us. God has already redeemed us. Christ has already rose from the dead, ascended into heaven, where he promised to prepare a place for us. Comes down to not simply a matter of faith as in believing, but a matter of faith as in trusting. Think of these things when you come up to receive Holy Communion. Because see, here's the unfortunate thing. We're going to receive Jesus Christ in the Holy Eucharist. And is he going to come into our heart that is silent and asks no questions and asks for no gifts? Do you know how it sounds sometimes like, you drop a coin into an empty can? It makes that plinking sound and then kind of starts to rotate and make that little noise before it finally drops to the bottom and settles down. Is that how the Holy Eucharist sounds in our heart? I think it's a fair question. I think it's a fair question. Because here we have this most intimate union with Jesus Christ, who comes into our heart that is poor, that is weak, that is ignorant, that is tempted, that is sorrowing, and we're silent and ask for nothing. So who do we have to blame, if we can use the word blame? Some people get triggered by that word. But who's to blame if we don't make progress in the Christian life? If we don't see ourselves making any progress in leaving behind sin and acquiring virtue? Is it Christ who has done everything and could not have possibly done more? Or is it us who does not know the gift and recognizes it and comes before the Lord with hands outstretched, humble and begging for the things that we need, knowing that we will receive them.